Hi, Year 12. We are going to go through Insensibility. This is probably going to take a few podcasts because it's quite a big poem. Don't be alarmed by the size of it, though. It's quite an accessible poem and one that you would confidently be able to write about. Okay, let's start with the title, Insensibility. As we said in class, this is that lack of emotion or the indifference to what's going on around you, that almost like an unconscious state in how we deal with things. So as we talked about in class, Owen, let's think of it in terms of context. Owen studied the Romanticist poetry, and the Romanticists, Keats, Wordsworth, Coleridge, and so on, and Shelley, were concerned about the bigger moments or the emotional moments that you can have with something. So we looked at Ode to a Nightingale when we looked at Owen's Strange Meeting, and this idea that it's just this one moment of listening to this song of the nightingale and all the thoughts and images and emotions that it conjures. So here, Owen is responding to the Romanticists. The insensibility itself goes against the Romanticist poems. The other thing that we talked about in class is that some people argue that this poem is a direct response to William Wordsworth's The Happy Warrior. And The Happy Warrior is a poem that alludes to Nelson, possibly. There's some people who suggest that it does, but it's this idea that, you should be happy about going to war and dying and slaughtering and all of these things. And it's this idea that war is heroic and gallant. So arguably you can link this poem to Dulce Decorum Est just purely based on that, and you'll see when we go through it, you'll see some very strong connections with Dulce and with Strange Meeting and Futility and Anthem and The Next War as well. They're all in here. They're all interconnected, and you're going to see that through it. Now, let's talk about structure before we go on. It does use the lyric ode structure. The lyric ode traditionally is an intellectual and emotional poem about a particular person or event. So the structure itself becomes ironic because this is not about emotion. This is about the complete opposite of what the ode should be about. It uses half rhyme with assonance and consonants. So you'll notice we have the half rhyme killed, cold. In the consonants there, the repetition of the k sound. Here, fleas and feet. The repetition in the assonance, the e sound, the fleas, feet. And again, a half rhyme. Brothers, withers. Flowers, fooling. So these are all para rhymes, if you will, or half rhymes. And what you have happening with that assonance and that consonants and the half rhymes is the idea of something that's incomplete. Just as some of the other poems agitate, because when we read the sonnets, we're expecting a certain structure, and Owen plays with those structures. He turns the iambs into trochees and plays around with it, so we get disoriented. And this happens with this poem as well. In terms of meter, there is no regular meter in this one. There are some iambs in there, but it's not really in iambic pentameter. In fact, if you have a look, we've got these long lines followed by short lines, followed by a long line, then a short line, then a long line, like long line and short and short. And if you look at it visually, you can see that there's no consistency there at all in line length, which suggests that the meter is broken. Like visually, we can see that the meter is broken, and it is broken. And we have the enjambment as well, so that, for instance, here it all flows over more than one line as well. So structurally, there's a lot going on here. The other thing that you'll notice, if you have a look straight away at stanza 1, we've got all these repetitions of the F sound. here, another one here, and here. There's a couple there, more there. What you should do is actually, just out of curiosity, go through the poem and find all those F sounds and count them all and see how many they appear in. This particular first stanza has a lot of them. The F sound, that f sound, sound is what's called a fricative. And the fricative, when we actually pronounce that sound, it tends to be a harsh sound. It's because we create that sound with greater force when we pronounce fricatives, which means that we do get that harsh quality and a greater force in the sounds that we're making. It also, when it's followed by a long vowel, it kind of shortens those vowels down. So it changes the way vowels are pronounced. And so, again, it's an agitation with what he's doing here. And it is meant to be sounding harsh. This poem is really having an attack at the people back at home, the same as Dolce is. In Dolce, he does it with a lot of visual imagery. This one, he's using a lot of lexical chains and sound and structure, and really showing the idea of the loss of emotion that comes. The other thing is, he also follows Horace's what's called the Beatus Ille, which is a pastoral poem that starts with "Happy the man who," and it keeps following that particular way of writing, which was very common in the Romanticist period as well. And so it's a form of poetry that Owen would have been very familiar with. And he's using that style as well, which, again, he's using it ironically. He's trying to take something familiar and subvert it. Structurally, each stanza focuses on a different topic. And so the first four stanzas are reflecting on different types of insensibility, which we're going to go through. The other thing as well, structurally, is it's an allusion to it's a biblical allusion to the Beatitudes and to two particular aspects of the Bible in Romans chapter 4, verse 8, and then Matthew chapter 5, verse 6. Matthew is the one that we're most concerned with in that, sorry, I've just lost my piece of paper. Sorry. Okay, so Matthew chapter 5, verse 6 says, "Blessed are they which do hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled." So in this poem, though, it's used ironically because, as we'll see as we go through it, when we look at the lexical chains and the discourse that is happening in this, the language discourse happening in this poem, is that the happiness in this poem is empty. And so, again, this use of the biblical allusion to the Beatitudes and to Matthew 5, 6 is ironically used. Okay, let's now have a look at let's start going through it line by line so you can see further what we're talking about. So, happy are men who yet before they are killed can let their veins run cold. So this particular stanza is about the man who does not have human compassion. And this is the insensibility that we're talking about in this particular stanza. The repetition, as we said, of happier men, or the anaphora, but it's a biblical allusion to the Beatitudes and also a response to Wordsworth's The Happy Warrior. And so because he's using everything ironically, then we can take it that he is not presenting us with a romantic image of the soldiers. He's wanting, as he's told us before, he wants to get the truth out. He wants to get the pity, like people to see the pity of war. And so he's wanting us to see the truth. And in this case, this is about men who have lost their compassion. So happy are men who yet before they are killed can let their veins run cold. That's a metaphor, and it's ironically used here as well. So happy the man who dies before he's dead. The let their veins run cold is that representation of the loss of compassion. Whom no compassion flees or makes their feet sore on the alleys cobbled with their brothers. Okay, flees is to jest or to laugh at in a not so nice way. And so here with this word flees, like this laughing jeeringly at someone, compassion becomes personified. And in that personification, compassion is put into a position of like a bully or someone who mocks somebody else. And then we get this really disturbing visual imagery, or makes their feet sore on the alleys cobbled with their brothers. It's this idea of cobblestones, and that the ground is littered with the bodies, and they're walking along the bodies of the fallen soldiers. It's a very disturbing image. And it's this idea that they're so desensitized that they can actually do this, that they've lost their compassion. So you could link it to we flung him in the wagon that we have in Dolce, or even the funeral notions that we have in Anthem, what parts in bells who die for these as cattle. They're all linked together. Also with those lines, brothers, it's a very special word choice. Brothers, it is about that deeper relationship. And in religion, we use that term as well. And so it's this connectedness and a really deep relationship. And it kind of stands out by itself against all the other words, to suggest that there is some kind of connection, but in this case there actually is no connection because they're walking all over the bodies of them. The brother at arms is a traditional heroic glorification of the soldier as well. It alludes to Shakespeare's Henry V, where the king speaks to, he's trying to build up this, motivate all of his soldiers to go and fight and to die. And he says, "We few, we happy few, we band of brothers, for he who sheds his blood with me today shall be my brother." And so it's this idea that through war you get this connection and you become brothers. So that there, this year, the brothers is an allusion to Shakespeare's Henry V. And this idea, again, used ironically and metaphorically, that these bodies are just the skulls of the cobblestones that they're all walking along. Okay, this is already really long, so I'm going to stop it here and then start the next one. And there's probably going to be a few because we're only halfway through stanza 1.